Hi there, welcome back to the Catholic History Show. My name is Brendan. I am a former high school history and theology teacher. And today the subject I'm going to talk about is the infamous Pope Joan. Many Catholics are actually unaware or unfamiliar with the legend of Pope Joan, which is why I'm bringing it to the show. But outside of the church, there are actually plenty of people who are aware of the legend and believe it as fact. So it's important to be able to contradict the inanity of these people. So that's why we're going to talk about Pope Joan. Before I begin, though, I'm going to give a quick plug. If you want more information on this subject, I'll give the link in the bottom. It's to Professor Thomas Madden. I actually use him in a lot of these videos, but that's because of how accessible I think he is. He's a history professor at St. Louis University, and he's actually really great. And if you're interested in getting a lot more detail about Pope Joan, his medieval myth series that he does is about 4 hours long. He does like 30 minutes on Pope Joan, is exceptional, so it's really good. I'll give you all the sources that he uses to refute Pope Joan. Actually, been refuted for a long time. If you Google Pope Joan, pretty high in the search, you're going to find an article by the Smithsonian. It's one of the worst articles I think I've ever read, right? That's how bad it is from a historical perspective. It's not scholarly at all, and after reading it, I think I'm okay with the defunding of the Smithsonian, and I actually have relatives that work there, so I don't recommend Googling Pope Joan unless you know who the people are that write the articles or write the books about it, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. So anyways, that's kind of where it starts. So let's dive in. Who was Pope Joan? So in a nutshell, the story of Pope Joan is kind of obvious. It's the belief that we had a female pope around 854 to 856, depending on who your source is. Pope Joan was this woman who disguised herself as a man in order to travel with her lover. So she's already committing sin by having a lover outside of marriage. Anyways, they travel to Athens, and she enters into some of the schools in Athens and learns a lot about philosophy and theology, and she quickly garners respect by a lot of the scholars in essentially the medieval world who recognize her aptness for intellectual development. And of course, she's continuing to be disguised as a man for this whole period. Well, then she gets brought into some of the ecclesiastical groups, and obviously this is because during this period, the main learning that's taking place is within church groups. And so she rises to the top of the intellectual ecclesiastical community, and all of a sudden she finds herself unanimously named Pope in, again, 854 to 856, somewhere around there. And what happens is, about 2 years after the beginning of her pontificate, she accidentally has a baby while in a procession. So she's continuing to see her supposed lover, and she has this baby while she's processing. There's a couple different versions of the story, but she's processing essentially from the Vatican to the Lateran. And so the Roman people, get very upset because their pope just had a baby in the middle of the street, and they're all watching it. So the Roman people tie her to the end of a horse and stone her as the horse is carrying her through the streets of Rome. Anyways, that's the story of Pope Joan. So now we're left with the question, is it true? And that would be a resounding no, it's not true. You see, what happened was that around the time of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, in the 13th century, Frederick was not a fan of the Pope. It's around this time that the story of Pope Joan comes about. In any event, his subordinates made up this story as a farce to make fun of the papacy. But the problem was that it was so copied over and over and over again that years following that, scholars were unable to differentiate whether or not it was true, and they didn't really know where the story had come from. It's important to note here, right? We're talking about the 13th century, the 1200s or so. That's hundreds of years, almost 500 years after, or 400 years after Pope Joan supposedly lived. In any event, one of the big points where the story of Pope Joan was brought to the public stage was in the Jan Hus trial, the Inquisition of Jan Hus. And if you don't know who he is, he was a supposed reformer of the church. He wasn't, he was a heretic. But before the Protestant Reformation, he's kind of the precursor to it. Anyways, he's in front of the Inquisition, and one of his arguments against the papacy is the story of Pope Joan. He says, look, the Holy Spirit clearly doesn't protect the Holy Roman Pontiff from error because we had a female pope. Like, how could you say the Holy Spirit is protecting this office of the papacy if we had a female pope? And the interesting part of that, about that Inquisition, is that the church people that are debating him in the Inquisition do not refute, or do not even attempt to refute, the existence of a Pope Joan. So clearly, they believed in this this female pope that existed in the 9th century. So anyways, that's one kind of proof that Pope Joan existed, and you'll hear people today, feminists today, that have raised up Pope Joan as some great hero in the church, or martyr in the church. You'll hear them use that as one of their points of evidence. They've got several pieces, including coins and things like that, and statues. Again, it's important to note that in the 1400s, essentially everyone in Christendom believed that there had been a female pope because of the widespread story of this Pope Joan, including even popes. And so there probably were statues made of Pope Joan. I think there might still be one in Rome, or there's one that's claimed that still exists in Rome today of this Pope Joan. So how do we know it's a false story? Well, that takes us to the humanist movement and actually the Protestant Reformation. As some of you may know if you've seen some of my videos, I'm not the biggest fan of the humanist movement or the Protestant Reformation, not a fan of the Protestant Reformation at all. But regardless, they actually did some really good scholarship on this, right? So the humanists, if you don't know, we're not talking about the modern humanists. I'm talking about the humanists taking place in the late 15th century into the 16th century. They were coming out of the whole Christendom era. We're starting to get more nationalism, patriotism, like separate units within Christendom, like England and France, Spain. National identity. And during this period, you had this kind of renaissance, if you will, of going back to original sources, right? They wanted to get rid of some of the scholastic accretions that had glommed onto the church, these legends and these traditions, if you will, and they wanted to go back to original sources. Well, when the humanists did this, they realized that originally the Pope Joan story came from this farce from the court of Frederick II, and that kind of blew the whole story out of the water. And the reason I bring up the Protestants, and I get to say something about some of the Protestants, are there were actually Protestant scholars who attested to this. Now, that didn't stop a lot of the Protestant reformers from using the story of Pope Joan to, of course, defame the papacy. However, there were some intellectually honest Protestants that did actually go back to the original sources and realized that Pope Joan was not actually a real person. So that's a little bit of the evidence. Fast forward today, that scholarship has never been actually overturned. You get circumstantial evidence that they say points to it, but they're really in the timeline of the papacy, which we have a pretty good timeline of the papacy. There is no place for a Pope Joan to actually have existed. So anyway, that's kind of a very short refutation. Again, if you want to go through the whole thing, highly recommend Professor Thomas Madden's Medieval Myth series. Like I said, it's 4 hours long total, but I think he does like 30 minutes, 35 minutes on Pope Joan. It can help you through some of that. All right, well, that's kind of all I had for today for the video on Pope Joan. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, subscribe to it, and I guess you're supposed to click a bell. There's a bell. Click the bell. And you get notifications when I do more videos. I'm in my shop today, so it's a little bit messy in here, a little bit dirty. In any event, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please share it with your friends and family if you liked it. And have a Merry Christmas.